The views expressed on the Nova Society are those of the participants and do not reflect the view of any institution any participant is associated with. We'd like to welcome everyone back to the Nova Society, and today, myself and Dr. Scott Gersher will be talking about proxy wars. And we're going to be talking about the proxy war that is currently going on in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas, and the proxy war between the United States and Iran. What is going to be the role of the United States going forward in that war? What options does the United States have to engage in proportional responses as United States troops come under fire? So let's listen in. You're chomping at the bit with foreign policy.
Well, it seems like there's a lot going on, and I remember you were reading some comments from a listener,
Yeah.
and one of them was, "Can you explain foreign policy to me?" And I think that's probably a worthy thing for us to do, since you and I have perspectives on this that are different from what you see. I think a lot in the news media, at least on some sides of it, and what's going on in the world is, always very interesting, but there are some parallels right now between where we are right now and where we were in like 1941 that are really, really kind of interesting. And I thought we should devote some time to thinking about what our policy probably should be, what it is, and what it should be. And what it's all about. And I mean, I think just to start with, the U.S. foreign policy has really been based, I think, since the end of World War II, on the idea that we can count on ourselves to conduct ourselves with relative honor and discipline, and that the world is a better, safer place because of it. Agree?
I would agree with that, yes.
I mean, it's not always the case, as we know. Shameful episodes do occur. Sometimes we do really bad things for possibly good reasons, some bad reasons. What we define as our interests has not always been consonant with the words honor and discipline. And the death of these service people in Jordan this week has brought people to say, wow, I didn't even know we had anybody over there, and what are they doing there? It reminded me that in 2011, I think it was, I wrote a paper in Dr. Berner's class called The Realist Looks at Syria, where I took the viewpoint of realism, realpolitik, and came to the conclusion that Syria offers us so little in the way of interests that we should not be involved in it at all. And that paper, by the way, has been cited numerous times over the years. I haven't gotten a look at it lately, but it's been read more than any other paper I have on academia.edu. And it has been cited numerous times. It's still available there on academia.edu. The Realist Looks at Syria. And I think it's something that we need to keep in mind when we deal with the Middle East, because we do have serious interests there, but not the entire Middle East is a U.S. interest.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing that I think is important for us to think about is a lesson that Israel just learned on October 7th, that we learned on 9/11 and December 7th, 1941, which is that terrible catastrophes often seem unthinkable until they happen, and that we have to be somehow prepared for the unthinkable. It's a tough job, but that's what they run for. Where we are right now seems to be on the brink of a global war, of World War III, and the parallels there, right, are such that, World War II really began because three autocratic regimes with a very bad habit for violence and coercion decided that they were going to make bids for empires that kicked out the old regimes that had kept them down and asserted themselves, right? So you have Japan's rampage in China and in the Asian Pacific, specifically in Papua New Guinea and then the Philippines. You have Italy's bid for an empire in Northern Africa and the Mediterranean. And of course, you have Germany's push for hegemony in Europe and probably beyond that. And while these things were happening, we were standing on the sidelines doing what we're doing right now in Ukraine, giving weapons and support for however long this is going to last. I hope that it continues, because I'd rather Ukraine's warriors fight the invading hordes from Russia than we will, which we will have to do if Ukraine falls. Putin decides that, yes, I can have a Russian empire again, and decides to invade a Baltic country or Finland or another NATO ally. So I think that's kind of where we are, right? The Russian Empire, which needs to have Ukraine because of religious reasons more than anything else. I think, at least in Putin's mind. Iran's desire for the Shiite crescent, right? That goes from Iran through Iraq, through Syria, into Lebanon, and then down eventually to where Israel and Jordan are currently, is a dream of Iran. And then last, of course, China, but not least, China, and their desire to be the hegemon in the Western Pacific, Asia, etc.
Right. Yeah. I mean, just with some of the things that you've mentioned so far, I think we have to understand, and I think people do understand, that prior to World War One, America was a totally different place. We were extremely more isolationist. We basically wanted to be left alone. And now we've transitioned into, unfortunately, what would be considered the world's policeman, because we are the last remaining true superpower left on Earth. So there's some responsibilities. We don't like them sometimes, although we do like considering ourselves a superpower. We just don't like sometimes the responsibilities that come along with that. And today, the first two world wars, of course, as everybody knows, really started in Europe. And then the EU came along, so that tension between those nations kind of dissipated and became more of an economic bloc that is dependent on each other. Today, if a new world war is going to start, it will be in the Middle East. Because if you look at the geopolitical dynamics of the Middle East today, it's basically the same as Europe in the beginning of the 20th century, before World War One and during World War II. So there's that comparison to be made. The problem I think people have is when they are watching, their news sources or their social media, there's a huge difference. Now, you made mention of the attack that was made in Jordan, and you've got Lindsey Graham and you've got some of the hawks out there saying, bomb this, bomb that, do this, do that. We have to be able to separate out rhetoric. It's easy for Lindsey Graham to get up there and say, we should be bombing Syria or bombing Iran.
Or Tehran, yeah.
Or Tehran. It's easy to say that because what you say has no influence. You're not the commander in chief. You're not the one making the big decision. So you can go on those all out kind of rhetorics and make those statements for political reasons, because it makes you sound like you're tough. But in the reality, if you're put into the shoes of the person making the decision, probably that's not the way you're really going to go, because there's going to be a lot of advisors, a lot of generals, a lot of foreign policy wonks. They're going to be out there advising you, this is a bad idea. Escalation is not good, because there is this fear, once again, that the Middle East is where World War III, if it's going to start, that's probably where it's going to start, just because of the geopolitical dynamics going on there. So it's a fine line to walk for the last remaining world superpower. We don't have, other than Israel, we don't have as much economic interest in the Middle East as, say, Europe does. The United States could be self-sufficient as far as oil is concerned. People don't understand that we buy oil from the countries in the Middle East simply to keep them from going bankrupt. Because if we didn't buy their oil, what else are they going to sell? Sand? I mean, they have no other commodity with which to keep their infrastructure going. So we do that, and again, you hear a lot of people say we could be self-sufficient energy. Absolutely. But then again, we risk even more destabilization in an area that is already destabilized. Now, you were talking about your paper. I also had one I wrote for Berna's class, and it was about Syria. And it was a conflict. It was a conflict evaluation of it. And my take was that much of what is going on in Syria, because no longer at the time, is actually about the Syrians. It was about what the Russians wanted and what the Americans wanted. It became a proxy war. And then when you get into those proxy wars, the original reasoning behind whatever the conflict is in Syria kind of gets lost in the dynamics of a conflict, especially when you've got two powers. And back then, Russia was considered another superpower or a near peer. And so the Syrians were kind of torn in between. So the real reason for their conflict might get lost, which is something that happens quite a bit in these proxy wars. So people that are looking at, and that actually is the second most cited paper that I have. My first one is actually phenomenology, go figure. But so foreign policy, it is not black and white. I think sometimes the United States, the people of the United States truly believe that it's black and white. We have other considerations. It is a massively complex, multi-dimensional perspective kind of issue when you're talking about conflict, especially in a destabilized area with so many different agendas that exist when it comes to the Middle East. And add to that every single one of those differing agendas, every single one of those countries have a reliance on one commodity, one true commodity. And that just makes it even more complex when we start to think about
it. Just to build on that, the truth is that Russia, just because of the size of the landmass that it encompasses, is something more of a Middle Eastern country than, or I should say, probably almost as much a Middle Eastern country and an Asian country as it is a European country, and we tend not to think about that, but Russia has real interests in the Middle East, which included seaport, naval base in Syria, which was very important to them, and borders with Middle Eastern countries. It just seems to me that, and I had not seen this quote before, I just saw it this morning for the first time, that after October 7th, Putin declared that these conflicts in Ukraine and Middle East are going to be part of a single larger struggle that will decide the fate of Russia and the entire world. Chilling, but probably true. And it was the goal of Russia in the 2016 election to prevent Hillary Clinton from becoming president. I'm not sure that they necessarily wanted Trump. I think if Bernie Sanders had defeated Hillary Clinton, they could have stepped down and let Bernie Sanders run against Trump, and they would have been very happy with either one of them. As different as they are, simply because they felt that Hillary Clinton would be more like Lindsey Graham, neocon at heart, interventionalist, more willing to get involved in other people's conflicts than those other two candidates, and obviously Trump has proven that
and Hillary Clinton was more of a foreign policy wonk than, say, Bernie Sanders was more domestic. Trump, nobody knew what the heck he was thinking. And I think they feared the fact that you had a Secretary of State, a former Secretary of State. I think that frightened them as well, because she was a foreign policy wonk, as we like to call, as opposed to the other two.
Right. And also one that actively supported the Arab Spring and actively supported the color revolutions in the former Soviet Union, including Ukraine's bid to become more independent of Russia. So in a lot of ways, Hillary Clinton, not Trump, was the objective that Putin and Russia had during the 2016 election. Now, you can see a lot of people around the world, not just Putin, kind of sitting there going, man, I hope Trump gets back in. And we can expect them to do everything in their power to help that happen. But and that includes Xi, by the way. And so, the sort of the isolationists, the sort of like bizarre, making everything personal, like love letters to Kim and so on and so forth, is so prevalent in Trump's thinking that, he doesn't really care what happens to the people who live in those countries, as long as he gets the flattery that he needs from their leaders and gives those leaders what they want without resorting to any kind of war or violence or anything else. And I think that that's what people have to be on guard about. I mean, Trump's got a very short memory. He doesn't seem to remember that I don't even think he'd been president for hours when he greenlighted an operation that ended up with the deaths of, I think, 4 servicemen, and completely just turned around and blamed the generals for poor execution of what had been a great plan in his mind. But I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, because we have a president right now, and the president that we have right now is the one who's going to make the decision on where to strike at Iran and how to handle the situation as it is right now without turning it into World War III, but deterring Iran from more violence through their proxies. And a lot of that, we know that there are troops in Yemen, and we know that we know now that, I suppose we didn't know before, that there are troops in Syria and Iraq and Jordan, and that, we're still very heavily involved in this area. This is the danger zone that we're in right now continues to be between democracy and totalitarianism. And, just as that was the case in the 1940s, that is the case again. And I think we need to continue to support the democracies that are out there, and continue to build alliances, and continue to do what we're doing right now to deter our enemies from striking at us. It seems crazy to say after this drone attack, but we've put up with these kinds of limited attacks from proxies before, and so have they, right? I mean, during, Vietnam, when we were dumping bombs on Hanoi, we weren't dumping bombs on Beijing.
Right.
And we know that China was supporting the North Vietnamese, and we know that Russia was supporting the North Vietnamese. That's what a proxy war is. And these are proxy wars. We need to go after the proxies. If you go after the principals, then you've got a major clusterfuck and probably global war.
Yeah, but I mean, proxy wars, and there have been so many, and it just hasn't been the 20th century. There's been proxy wars, going back a couple of centuries. The American Revolution, in many ways, was a proxy war
Mm-hmm.
between Britain and all of those countries that really wanted to see Britain fail. France, the Dutch, so many different countries were involved. A lot of people think that it was just the French. It wasn't. The Spanish were involved. There was a bunch of different countries, and it wasn't because they really cared about the United States becoming a country of its own. They just wanted to make Britain look bad, and this was a perfect way to do it without truly directly engaging with against the British. So whenever we look at proxy wars, we have to remember they've been going on for an awful long time. And once again, I'll always go back to this. Now, it didn't happen in the American Revolution because, of course, the Americans won. But if they were to lose, if the Americans were to have lost the American Revolution, what a different, of course, we would be still under British rule. And you wouldn't have seen any of those countries come to our aid because now the proxy is over with. The proxy war is done. We lost. Boom. They're out. And I think sometimes that's something we have to look at whenever we're talking about these proxy wars. Should the United States go after Iran directly? Because that's really where all this is coming from. And I don't think anyone thinks that is a really good idea. Once again, I think you're going to see some talking heads, some politicians trying to score some points, going to stand up there and say, yes, this is what we're supposed to do. But the reality is that if they were in the big chair making the big decisions, that probably would not be the decision that they would make, because it serves no great purpose. My issue is always the idea of proportional response. What exactly is proportional response? If I'm the parent of any one of these 3 service people that were killed, there is no proportional response that you can give that is going to be acceptable to me in any way. The Hawks, there really is no proportional response that you can give that's going to satisfy them. Once again, a bunch of people that have no dog in the fight as far as being the decision maker. Yes, they can sit there on the TV and say, yes, we should do this. But if we were to do it and it all goes wrong, they'll be the first one to say, well, that was a mistake. Because again, like you say, they have such short doggone memories. They don't remember, what they said before. So the question, I guess, is if we go after the proxies, go after Hezbollah, and I think we would also have to go after Hamas, and we would have to really come down on the Houthis. Are we risking running into the same world public opinion that the Israelis ran into? I mean, are our allies going to start looking at us, even like the British, who have been very supportive of us? They've been down there with ships. Or is this just a matter of, instead of sending, we have the one carrier group there, we just send over 2 more? I mean, how far does that go?
Yeah, I think there's still a second carrier group close by. Hasn't moved completely out of the area, and that we've got the ability of obviously to strike wherever we want. I'll say this, and I've said it before a million times, and you know what I'm about to say, I think, is that it's shocking to me that Israel had such a short leash. And that actually may, in some ways, be turning right now because of the revelation that the UN's RNWA, whatever that stands for, I forget. But the UN force that has been in Gaza all along, provides schools and medical and so on and so forth, actually had among their personnel Hamas members that took part in 10/7, and I think 9 countries or 10 countries have agreed to join us in defunding the UNRWA because of that. and that when the UN is involved in a war, that's a really bad look, and it's certainly possible to look at at this as a turning point. I don't think that anybody would ever look at the United States the way they look at Israel. And I think the reason for that, sadly, is anti-Semitism. There are people who simply do not believe that Israel has a right to exist. There are people who project their own belief that, we're white European colonists, when in fact 60%, I think, of the population of Israel is Mizrahi or Middle Eastern descent, came from all over the region, had never gotten as far as Poland and Russia, et cetera. So I don't think that the United States is going to face that. Now, if we were to bomb Tehran, I think that we would be probably overstepping. I think we would feel that here. Forget about John Bolton and
Right.
and Lindsey Graham and the rest of the people who always want to go to nuclear war, no matter how the provocation is, how small or large the provocation is. There are some people in this country who are in positions of advisorships who, want to send in the nukes immediately, but we can discount their voices, I think. We have to look again. Proxy wars are proxy wars because you fight the proxies. So the proxies fight the proxies, and we will fight the proxies. And Charlie Wilson's war in Afghanistan, the Russians knew, the USSR knew that we were supplying the Mujahideen with weapons, including really deadly ones that shot down helicopters and destroyed tanks and so on, that they could not get themselves. And yet we didn't escalate the war to being World War II, III at that point, right? So I think the grown-ups in the room, which include rational actors in both the former Soviet Union, Europe, China, I think, even North Korea, which we might have to talk about in a second, even North Korea, have not taken those steps to destroy the entire world because they are rational actors. So whatever this is going to be, the response that the Biden team is going to put in place, it's going to be limited. It will be proportional. Maybe it may be proportional in the Big Brother way of like the harder hit, the more violence, right? That we've discussed in the past. That when I was in the backseat of the car with my older brother and I got too close to his side of the car, he would punch me as hard as he could, and that deterred me from moving into his part of the car in the back seat. Yeah. And it's a crazy analogy maybe, but it does hold that we're going to be the big brother here and we're going to hammer him hard. As we said a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, what Israel has been best at is what they did yesterday, I think, where they had IDF troops dressed as women and doctors go into a hospital in the West Bank and assassinate leaders of Hamas who were getting ready to pull off some kind of terrorist attack. Like that's the kind of stuff, killing Iranian scientists who are involved in their nuclear program. Those kinds of actions that are high power have a real effect of slowing them down. The what was the name of the worm that the Israelis and the United States put into the centrifuges? I can't remember the name of the worm, but they injected this worm into the system, and the centrifuges went flying off the tables practically because they were so out of control. That was like a brilliant, not particularly violent move to slow down Iran's run towards having nuclear weapons. And that's another key goal here has to be to deter Iran from wanting to join the nuclear family. And that would include like Pakistan not fighting back with nukes when Iran shoots missiles at them. So I don't think, I know it was a long time ago that you asked, that we're going to face the same sort of condemnation that Israel has faced for the simple reason of anti-Semitism, and we're not going to overstep as many of the big thinkers in foreign policy here in the States want to by attacking Tehran itself and causing World War III to start.
Yeah. And, I was noticing in the news, there was an article, which they seem to make this huge deal out of. Israel bombed an area that turned out to be a cemetery that, according to them, there were tunnels underneath. That's why they were bombing it. And the condemnation of bombing a cemetery, you didn't kill anybody. Because,
Right.
it's like my father used to say, how many people how many people in that cemetery are dead? And I'd say, no, Dad, I don't. He goes, all of them. It was like, okay. So it's not like you're killing anyone. Is it desecration? Sure, absolutely. But the amount of blowback just from that action was incredible to me. I was like, you're really making a huge deal out of bombing a cemetery, but you're not making a huge deal out of the fact that there were tunnels underneath it. So who's desecrating the cemetery more? The people that are doing the underneath the tunnels underneath, or the people bombing it to get rid of the tunnel? So it kind of amazes me how quickly our sensibilities and our morality kind of changes depending on what we're talking about. And yeah, I agree with you. I think they're going to respond. I think it's going to be a probably sustained response. My question is, right now, and we'll see how this all plays out, is it going to be against the proxies, or is it going to be against Iran directly? And when I say that, again, you make mention of the, kill some of their nuclear scientists, those kind of things, which I honestly think, truly, in my mind, Israel is better at than we are. They are a lot better at that. Mossad is a whole heck of a lot better at that than we are. So that may be a partnership there. And, here we don't condone any kind of murder of anyone, but again, this is the type of society in the world that we live in today. And we will continue this conversation in our next episode. We hope you join us. So that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our sponsor for this episode, the Journal of Interdisciplinary Conflict Science. The JCIS is an open journal for upcoming scholars. The JCIS is currently accepting article submissions on an ongoing basis. The JCIS is a publication of Nova Works, a scholarly depository at Nova Southeastern University. A link to the journal is in our description. We'd also like to thank our podcast partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, who is our editing partner, and Podkite, who does all of our analytics. We'd also like to thank iHeartRadio, where people get their music and podcasts, Apple iTunes, the largest source for music and podcasts on the internet, Spotify, the most popular source for the Nova Society. The Nova Society is available on all these and other quality platforms mentioned in our description. We'd also like to thank our listeners. Without you, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a comment, a question, or would like to be a guest on the Nova Society, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. Always remember, the power of society is knowledge. So for Dr. Scott Gershwer, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, Dr. Priscilla Hobbs, and all of us here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Be well, and we hope to see you again next time.